agriculture, and irrigation. The single decisive factor that made it possible for mankind to settle in permanent communities was agriculture. After farming was developed in the Middle East in about 6500 BC, people living in tribes or family units did not have to be on the move, continually searching for food or herding their animals. As farming all over the world has always relied upon a dependable water supply, the first great civilizations all grew up along rivers. The civilization of ancient Egypt, for example, was indebted to the Nile River and its dependable seasonable flooding. Egyptian society was confined almost exclusively to the Nile Valley and Delta. Most settlements were located on or close to the banks of the Nile, with the densest population found on the floodplains. Such an increasing population could only have been sustained if the land and the economy could support it. As more people poured into the area, the Egyptians developed systems to deal with fluctuations in the height of the annual flood of the Nile. Moreover, by the Middle Kingdom, they had learnt to reclaim previously unused and unusable land for agricultural purposes. Each period brought growth in the populations of existing cities and the founding of new cities. Because so much depended on the Nile's annual flood, the Egyptians sought to control as much of it as they could by constructing dikes, maintaining high walls, and digging irrigation channels. They also developed a simple mechanism to lift small amounts of water out of the channels and onto the fields. That device, called a shaduf, consists of a bucket set at one end of a counterweight pole, and is among the earliest devices for lifting water from streams to higher lying fields. Despite all their efforts to control the annual flood, the ancient Egyptians could not prevent problems. An inundation that was too high could result in damaging floodwaters. One that was too low might not provide sufficient water for irrigation. The Egyptians therefore gradually developed new methods of irrigation. Basin irrigation was one such innovation. As a form of water management, it allowed the ancient Egyptians to control the rise and fall of the river to best suit their agricultural needs. A crisscross network of earthen walls was formed in a field of crops that would be flooded by the river. When the floods came, the water would be trapped in the basins formed by the walls. This grid would hold water longer than it would have naturally stayed, allowing the earth to become fully saturated for later planting. Once the soil was fully watered, the flood water that remained in the basin would simply be drained to another basin that was in need of more water. They also started to build permanent dams further upstream, whereby water could be raised to a desired level. The water was then allowed to flow by gravity through canals to lower lying areas, where it was let out over gently sloping fields. However convenient and profitable, irrigations began causing problems as time went on. The chief problem caused by continuous irrigation was that the salt accumulating in the upper layers of the soil and stunting or preventing plant growth. Nearly all irrigation water, whatever its source, contains some salt, which percolates down to the water table and makes it increasingly salty. Where drainage is bad and the water table approaches root level, the concentrated salt makes plant growth impossible. Increased salinity due to poorly drained soil began to ruin rich lands of the southern Tigris-Euphrates Valley in Mesopotamia as early as 2100 BC. By 1700 BC, yields from these lands dwindled to one-fourth of their once abundant harvest, and the great Sumerian cities that depended on them went to ruin. Many civilization centers began to drift away.